What's up, hobby friends? In this visit... What's up, hobby friends? In this video, I'm going to be revisiting the Nighthaunt Battletome. This was just released a couple of weeks ago, and I've sort of held off on recording a video too quickly. I wanted to avoid having too strong of a knee-jerk reaction. I wanted to have a chance to read the book, digest through it a little bit, and at the same time, I also wanted to have a bit of time to paint up some new additions to my army. And I wanted to make sure that they were fully painted before I recorded this video so that I could show off fully painted models and not just bare plastic. So I do want to preface that this video is not going to be a comprehensive breakdown or a tactica by any means. I'm not exactly a huge tournament player, especially in the past couple of years with COVID. Haven't really been to any events, and even my Age of Sigmar gaming has slowed down recently. I get a couple of games every few months, nothing crazy, and the meta is constantly shifting. So I'm going to hold off on saying anything too definitive. I want to preface that everything in this video is my own opinion and more just a broad impression of the book, where we've come from its first iteration when Age of Sigmar 2.0 was released, how it's caused me to grow or expand my collection, what I've added. I'll talk briefly about what I like and dislike about the book, and then go through my initial list with the book, sort of what I'll be approaching Age of Sigmar with for the foreseeable, or at least for the next few months, and how I chose the units I chose and how I'm looking to adapt and expand, or what I think I will have to change with the list going forward as Games Workshop releases new updates, especially with the new season being previewed with the Realm of Gallet. So before I dive into the new Battletome, I sort of want to try and revisit and sum up the issues I had with the original book when it was first released, my misgivings and issues with it, and then how I feel that they've addressed these issues with the new book. So one of my core complaints from the original Battletome was that there was a lack of identity. It didn't feel like there was anything in the Nighthaunt army that really differentiated itself from any other Death army. Apart from the fact that everything flew and was ethereal, you had similar recursion, but it was much weaker than in what is now Soulblight Glavelords, originally Legion of Nagash. The Forbidden Power, campaign book did release the Legion of Grief army list, which sort of brought Nighthaunt at least to a semi-competitive level. I would say like a B or B+, but it was always a band-aid solution. And the core army itself really struggled with not just being powerful on the table, but having any sort of clear differentiation between itself and other Death armies. A lot of the units felt very samey, and apart from some minor variations in either it's a hit or 2 wound roll, everything was some variation of the 3+4+ or 4+3+, rend 1, damage 1, and at some point, you basically picked a unit based on points for wounds efficiency or damage output, and then you picked a unit based on how much it could absorb in terms of incoming damage for the points. Basically, you were tied down to which units, 2 or 3 invariably, that were the most efficient based on how much they cost in points, and then you built your army around that, and then you picked 1 or 2 heroes that were always useful because the rest were pure trash. There was always going to be Reignor and a Guardian of Souls or a Spirit Torment. If you were playing Legion of Grief, you took the Dreadblade Harrow. The army saw a lot of points reductions over the years from when it was first released, but it never really felt like a unique army that was worth playing. It always just felt like a weaker Death. And if you excluded Legion of Grief and outside of the army aesthetic, I don't think Nighthaunt was a very fun or enjoyable army to play. So even after my first quick reading of the new Battletome, I was immediately struck by just how well Games Workshop has addressed, and I'm not saying that my comments specifically forced them to rewrite the book or to address it, but the issues I had with the book, they addressed very, very well. And that's tying into what I was talking about in terms of the core identity of the army, the way it wants to play, the way that it feels on the tabletop, and then differentiating itself from the other death armies. So with the new edition of Age of Sigmar, they got rid of Forbidden Power, they got rid of the Legion of Grief, and essentially what we're left with is 3 unique or distinct armies. We have the Flesh Eater Courts, we have Soulblight Gravelords, and then we have the Nighthaunt. So on the one spectrum, we have sort of these fleshy undead creatures, the ghouls, the ghast, the zombies, a lot of these sort of Strigoi-like, if you remember the old fantasy bloodline, half undead, half living creatures. Those were the Flesh Eater Courts. The way that they play on the table, they're not particularly durable, but there's a lot of them. Their recursion is okay, but they hit like a truck in combat, very much like a hammer. It's about hitting hard, wiping out your opponent as fast as possible, and then scattering around to take the objectives and control the field. You then have the Soulblight Gravelords, which is a re-rendition of the Legion of Nagash. So they're specifically the Bone Lords, the Skeleton guys, and the OCR Bone Reapers, I think I would treat them as an extension of the Soulblight Gravelords, just more of an elite version, less recursion, but higher durability. The entire theme of that army is they're not particularly hard to kill, but there's a lot of them. They bring them back fairly easily, and it's about grinding your opponent down with hordes and hordes of shimbling skeletons and zombies, just a lot of junk, while your more elite units hammer into the flanks and the rears, and they do the killing for you. And then you have the complete other end from the Flesh Eater Courts. You have the Ghosts, the Nighthaunt, where they were always described in the lore as being waves of terror, just waves upon waves of corporeal ghosts that feed on your basest fears and your dread and your terror. And using that, they kill you both physically and spiritually. And with the new tome and the way that they've rewritten the allegiance abilities, the way that this army plays on the tabletop is distinctly different, I find, now from Flesh Eater Courts and the Soulblight Gravelords and the OCR Bone Reapers. They're tanky, but they don't exactly have numbers. They're fast, but unlike Flesh Eaters where they're fast and they aim to kill you, but they can't take a hit, not particularly numerous, they can move around the table very quickly. I think they're good at killing when they can gang up on a unit, if they can stack the odds of combat in their favor, before slinking back into the shadows, redeploying, and moving to another part of the field of battle before your opponent can appropriately react. And I think that in itself has just made the army, or brought, excuse the pun, new life to the army where it didn't exist before. The way that they've rewritten the Wave of Terror in particular, I think has really changed the way that the army is played. And I'm not going to say that the army is S tier, but I definitely think that, especially if your style of play is in board control and in movement, this army has a lot to offer for a general who really wants to be able to milk every little ounce of value from their army. I don't think this book is particularly powerful on paper. No unit and no sort of combination stands out as, oh, we're going to win the game in the way that, say, the Stormcast Dragon Spam army does, or in the Stormcast Shooting army, the Lumineth Archer Spam, Daughters of Cain Marathi plus Snake Spam. There's nothing on paper that this book gives that makes the army unbeatable on the tabletop. But I think a combination of really good units and heroes across the board, some really good synergies, and then a really, really good allegiance ability, especially in the Wave of Terror, gives the army a high skill cap. So I think the average player is going to find this army rather lackluster. I would say, if I had to rank it, low Bs, maybe a B tier army. But I think in the right hands, this is definitely an A or S tier army. I do want to caveat that Games Workshop has teased a new season of war for Age of Sigmar. They are introducing a change, introducing the Galatian Reavers, or so Galatian veterans. shifting away from monsters more towards battle line, especially non-mounted battle line. I think that's going to definitely change the competitiveness of a lot of units and a lot of armies, and I think it's going to take a bit of time for the quote-unquote meta to settle and for people to figure out what will and won't work in the new edition. I definitely think some armies do become stronger. A lot of units become a lot more viable, while some armies don't really care, especially if their battle line are over 4 wounds, or if they're mounted, or etc. If they can't take advantage of this new veteran rule, they're not really going to care. So things like giants, for example, or dragon spam, not going to really care. But armies like Nurgle are going to absolutely love the new change to the edition. So everything I say now, just in terms of relative power, it's more just my general impression, especially comparing the book as it is now to its previous edition. I don't have a lot of experience playing around with new veterans rules. Now, I don't want to go page by page through the book, but I will just briefly say, Wave of Terror, I love it. I think that the ability to play the army MSU and really play on trying to stack these benefits, or accepting that, okay, for the most part, we're going to have a -1 to hit, which will counter all-out attack for the most part, is actually pretty solid. Trying to fish for the minus save or the always strike last is going to be not quite as frequent, but it can still happen. I think you have, it's like a 45% chance to get a -1 save, which negates all-out defense. If you can stack 2 of those, you can completely negate it entirely. The introduction of Discorporate, for example, making our units a little tankier so that we can take advantage of this, even though we don't get all-out defense, I think is good. Nothing to really say about the artifacts or the spell lores. They rejigged them so that some are, I don't want to say must-haves, but there are definitely some winners and some losers. I mean, that was no different from the old book. That's as it is. The processions, I definitely think there are some really strong winners. I think Grieving Legion is going to be the default, especially if you're concerned about the mirror match. I think the Grieving Legion shuts down Nighthaunt entirely because you can't take advantage of the ability to retreat and charge with your entire army, which I think I forgot to mention. That is also an incredible bonus to this army. The change to Ethereal, they all have a 6+ ward now, so they no longer need to be within heroes to get the advantage of a death save. They've always ignored the modifiers positive and negative, which is both good and bad. But the fact that every unit can now retreat and charge really makes the army hypermobile, and it plays into the ability to hit a point, fade away into the shadows, and then move somewhere else. I think without an access to easy monsters, introducing some of these battle tactics makes it really easy to score those points, and some of them are actually quite easy to achieve relative to some of the actual core tactics. So I think when you're looking to build your army, you really need to think about the way you're gaining these passive victory points, not just in taking objectives, but in actually achieving your turn-by-turn tactics. And your grand strategy is a way to build a bit of risk mitigation into your army. And I like the fact that they've created some very thematic tactics in here that don't just revolve around, oh, okay, we're going to give a monster to Nighthaunt and have them play like every other army where you're going to want to complete missions with monsters, etc. When it comes to the War Scrolls, I think a lot of them have really improved. I think pretty much most of the book has been a step up from the previous Battletome. There's no heroes that are must-haves, although I definitely think that some are better than others. I think depending on the way that you want to play the army, the way that you want to build your list, and the models you want to field, I think there are a lot of viable hero choices. I don't think you're going to feel particularly bad if you do or don't take certain heroes. Although I will say with the introduction of veterans, not having at least one Cruciator is going to feel really bad. A -1 damage AoE completely negates the benefit of the Bounty Hunters Battalion and is a good way to protect your battle line, especially depending on the procession that you end up taking. For example, if you go with Scarlet Doom like I will be going, making your Revenant's battle line and veteran It's a pro. They can now fight in ranks. They can take advantage of counting as 3 for the objectives, which I don't think is the best way to use them. But taking double damage from other veterans or other units in a bounty hunter battalion could actually hamper you more than it benefits you. So having at least one cruciator, I think, is a way to get around that. But other than him, I think every other hero is a viable choice. One of the bigger issues as well I had with the previous book was the fact that you basically had to pick, or you only really wanted to pick 2 units, one to be your tank and one to be your hammer. And invariably, it came down to the points that the unit costed versus how much damage it could take or damage it could output, because everything had the exact same stat line. Their attacks weren't noticeably different. And it was always Chain Rasp as your tanks. And then originally it was Reapers as your hammers, but then with the points changes, I think about a year or 2 after the book was released, Revenants were almost always your go-to hammer unit, largely because of their ability to retreat and charge, along with their bonus attacks, meant that you just got more value, you got more damage output point for point from this unit. However, I think the points that they've costed every unit at, along with the processions potentially making units like Revenant's Battle Line versus not, and the introduction of veterans, allowing units to fight in ranks in combination. I know it's a lot, but in combination with whether you want to go MSU to take advantage of Wave of Terror, or whether you're taking big blocks to take advantage of using your Discorporate command ability to get a 5+ ward save. If you're playing Scarlet Doom to maximize mortal wound damage, for example, on the charge, it really impacts which units you want to take to be your hammers and to be your tanks. Especially between units like Reapers and Revenants, I think there is a real argument for both of them, depending on the procession you take, how big the unit's going to be, what you want the unit to do, and even the heroes you take and choose to support. I personally prefer the Revenant still, largely because they can issue their own unit commands. They hit on 3s, so they're not reliant on a command point or having a hero buff to get all-out attack or whatever to increase their hit rate. Plus, I think the models are cooler. But I definitely think in a larger unit, especially if you're not taking Scarlet Doom where they can't fight in ranks, for example, Reapers with a 2-inch range, they're getting bonus attacks for a bigger target unit, definitely have value, and you can make an argument for them over Revenants. I think there are some losers in the book. I think Craven Throne Guard are just pure trash. And it's not just a points thing. I think you can make them really cheap and they still wouldn't be that good, largely because they're not difficult to kill. They're not particularly durable. Their shooting is lackluster at best, and there's no real ability to improve it or make their shooting more impactful. I don't know. I don't see a use for Craven Throne, even though the models are cool. I think Glaive Wraith Stalkers being damage 2 and Battle Line is neat, but I don't think that you're going to find them in a lot of lists beyond tiny units of chaff, but they're so expensive. I think there's still 80 points. I think it's 80 points for 4 of them. Well, they're 105 for 4. So, I mean, pay 5 more points and you get 10 Chain Rasps. I don't know, man. I think they're definitely struggling. I think Harridans losing their Rend is actually pretty impactful. I think if you're taking Harridans, you're relying a lot more on MSU charging to try and get a -1 save from your Wave of Terror. But their sheer amount of attacks, in combination with potentially being veteran if they're battle line in the right procession. In Quicksilver Dread, they ignore ward saves, so depending on the meta and the armies you're facing, if they're playing a lot of Savage Orcs who have ward saves, a lot of other Death armies, they could be really good, especially in the mirror match. But I think they're definitely a niche unit. And then changes to the coach. It's less of a randomness with the rolling, it's more based on killing. I think there is a lot of good stuff in the book. Hexwraith as well, huge improvement. The fact that they can just move 24 inches and they cleared up by getting rid of their sort of move over to cause mortal wounds has made them a really viable unit. Much cleaner to use and very useful for objective play and for blocking your opponent in. So I've been preparing, as I was saying, for a couple of weeks, just expanding my collection to account for the units I would be adding to my army on account of the new book. So I ended up adding 10 hex raids. I'll be taking them in 2 units of 5 in my current list. I ended up painting 10 Craven Throne. More just for completion's sake, I think the unit itself doesn't look terrible. I'm hoping they'll get an update or an errata in the future that makes them playable. And then I painted a couple of the new heroes, All Rock the Drowner, as well as the Scriptor Mortis. And I took this as an opportunity to do a little bit of spring cleaning, clean up the cabinet. I haven't dusted it in a while, so there's a bit of dust and dirt on the actual cabinet shelf. Pulled up the entire army, did a bit of a photo shoot, and recorded this video. As a tangent, I think it's always cool to have a collection like this, even if you don't always play with it or use all of it in a game. It looks great on the shelf, and it's a great way to just future-proof, and no matter what happens with the Nighthaunt Battletome, I'm always going to have these units to play with. I can play around with different variations of lists, and especially with the way that the Battletome is now currently, I think there's a lot of viable builds, and I'm definitely looking forward to trying different lists and different variations. Even particularly one with Nagash. I think he's pretty expensive in the new book, but I think for a casual game, not necessarily a competitive game, I think he'd be fun to play. I definitely think there is a build in there that you can have some fun and some shenanigans with. I still don't have everything in the book. There's quite a number of heroes that I don't currently own. I think it'd be cool to paint eventually if I ever want to add them to my army. And I don't have any Dread Scythe Heritance. I'm not a particular fan of the models, and they don't really fit into a style of play that I want to play, at least currently, so I don't think I'll be adding them to the army anytime soon. If I ever do find a way to convert them up to look a little nicer, or if Games Workshop ever releases new hex raids, I'll probably revisit the army. But for now, I've added those units, and I'm probably good to set this aside for the next year, 2 years. Who knows? So this is the current iteration of my list after my first read through. It's a combination of models that I think are particularly good, as well as just models that I want to take, where I don't feel like it's the best unit, but it's a good starting point for me to sort of figure out the way I want to play the army and to try and evaluate whether I think the unit is actually good on the table or not. So I'll throw the list up on the screen, but essentially I am running the Scarlet Doom Procession. It's going to be a core battalion along with a Hunter's Battalion. I don't know the name off the top of my head, but essentially this is going to be the unit that hunts down other veterans and does double damage. So in the core battalion, we're going to have Kurdos Valentian, All Rock the Drowner, and a Korlgast Cruciator. The Cruciator is actually my army general. So his warlord trait is going to be ruler of the spectral hosts, and that will essentially allow me to recycle a unit that was summonable, that was slain, most likely one of the unit of 20 Revenants. And I haven't quite picked his artifact yet. I'm debating between -1 to wound for weapons within 3 inches, or the beacon that allows him to return 1 slain model to every summonable unit once per game. I think that one's kind of a little niche, but especially with the hex rays, because this army has no recursion, maybe by turn 2 or 3, if I only have 1 or 2 hex rays left, it'd be good to pop in an extra one to those units, as well as just resummon a couple of units to my other units. Gotta play some games, find out which will be better. In the core battalion for my battle line, I have 10 Chain Rasps and 2 units of Hex Wraiths. I really love the Hex Wraiths for objective play with the new book. Their ability to basically double move at 24 inches and create walls, block off the opponent, will really allow me to control the board, especially being a 4-drop army, they force me to go first. I can just shoot both those units up, create a wall that's I think like 12 or 10 inches wide, and essentially block them off from advancing onto objectives for a turn. In my Hunters battalion, I'm going to have 2 units of 20 Revenants, which are battle line, so they do qualify as veteran, which does mean that they are going to take double damage against or from other veterans, from other hunters. But the hope is that the Crusader, in combination with just their natural durability of a 4+ invuln save, as well as making one of them have a 5+ ward for a turn, will increase their survivability. I also have the Coach, which will also be the 3rd unit in the Hunters Battalion. It's got a lot of attacks, and I think being able to increase its damage against veteran battle line in particular will help increase its punching power, keep it at the 4+ ward, and do more mortal wounds in shooting. I do think at 330 points, I believe it is a little overpriced. I think in a more competitive list, if I was going to win, I would probably drop the Coach for 20 Reapers. But I think for the time being, as a fun list that has a little bit of everything and is fun to play, I think this is the way to go. At least the way I'm going to be fielding the army for the time being. I'm going with bigger blocks of Revenants, largely to take advantage of Corporeal. Depending on which unit is the target for the round, I want to give them a 5+ ward save. And then because I'm running Scarlet Doom, they become battle line, so they're a veteran. They can now fight in ranks because they're a veteran. And while they do take double damage, the Crusader will hopefully help to mitigate some of that. It also means that I can't be locked out from taking objectives that only veterans can score for a turn, depending on who goes second. 10 Chain Rasps and 2 units of 5 Hex Thrays aren't particularly durable, and having so much battle line means that I can't be locked out from scoring objectives by a canny opponent. Having a big unit or 2 big units also means redundancy. It's not just one hammer they have to worry about, and I can also use them to clip a unit I want to inflict mortal wounds on as a benefit of the procession while still fighting something else. The benefit to the procession is that you don't need every model to be in range to inflict the mortal wounds. You only need 1 model in the unit to clip. Roll dice for every model in the unit on a 5+ dual mortal wound to a unit within 1 inch. So you throw them in, they'll do probably on average 7, right? A third. 6 to 7 mortal wounds for every unit of 20 that charges in, which could kill a hero or reduce a chaff unit, do some wounds. And then they'll fight something else, and then they can retreat and charge. I also like Revenants because they are very self-sufficient. They can issue their own commands. If they already hit on a 3+, so if I all-out attack, they can do it to themselves. They'll hit on a 2+. I don't really need to babysit them. The only real synergy that I really need to concern myself with is the Crusader for the AoE reduced damage, depending on what I'm facing, and then All Rock to teleport, either pull them out of combat or just redeploy them across the board in a couple early turns or late turns of the game, score some objectives. The army is hypermobile. All Rock can teleport a unit anywhere, including himself. The Hex Wraiths can go 24 inches in a turn. The Coach can teleport itself anywhere on the board. So I'm not really limited to just having to move up and run. The army is hypermobile. A lot of movement shenanigans, which is really the way I enjoy and want to play the game. I had toyed around with the idea of taking a Dreadblade as well to double up All Rock's teleport ability, but I think that's kind of a gimmick. It doesn't really add much value to the army, apart from maybe a turn 1 double teleport of both the Revenant units. And it also means making All Rock the general, which means I can't take advantage of a general trait. So I'll need to play games. I think the army still struggles against anything that shoots a lot, which I think is still fairly meta. I'm undecided whether this army will do well against giants. I don't think it can one-shot a Gargant in 1 turn, so I think it'll probably struggle there. And anything magic heavy because I have no casters, I can't unbind anything. I don't really have a defense against magic. So as I play more games and as I feel out what the expected armies and their builds are, this list may change. But for now, as I was saying in the beginning, it has a bit of everything, a nice mix of units, and I think I'll enjoy playing this army a lot on the table. So that's it for this video. If you've made it to the end, thanks for watching. In actually recording it, didn't write a script, so it's kind of rambly. So hopefully I can edit it down into a coherent 20 minutes where it's not just me talking at you. I think there's a lot to love about the Nighthaunt book. It's not perfect by any means, but it's definitely an improvement, a vast improvement on the initial iteration. And even though I'm not really into Age of Sigmar right now, I'm more into Horus Heresy and Marvel Crisis Protocol, it has gotten me fired up to play some Age of Sigmar. I am looking forward to trying out the new Battletome whenever it happens. I've got my list, and I'm looking forward to iterate and come up with some variations on not just that core army, the one that I just showed you in the previous clip, but in different ways to actually build the army. And who knows, maybe I'll eventually expand the collection even more down the road. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure you give it a like and follow for more awesome weekly content. If you want to check out my other social media platforms, I'll make sure to have links in the video description below. As always, until next time, happy hobbying.